While most of us were involved in extracurricular activities, former astronaut, savvy guitar-playing spacewalker Chris Hadfield was involved in extravehicular activities. He's here to offer up some out-of-this-world advice and some earthly advice from his new book, An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth.
It is really, having been an astronaut for 21 years, which is longer than almost anyone. I think Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. I think he was an astronaut for 8 years. So I was in the office a long, long time, and I spoke at schools right across Canada, countless, thousands of schools, talking about spaceflight, but talking about how it matters to the students, to people on Earth. And the book is very much all of those stories, but also trying to pull out of them something useful for people to think about back on Earth.
Because you are performing some scientific experiments up there and trying to move the world ahead. So the next time the brain surgeon operates on you, perhaps something in space helped him or her do better.
Right. Yeah, that's not just the technical side, too. We run hundreds of experiments on the space station, but also the straight human side. How do you deal with fear? How do you deal with problem solving? How do you deal with rises and falls in your career and not let one tarnish the other? All of those ideas are magnified to be an astronaut, and therefore, under magnification, it helps sometimes to see more clearly how to use them.
And when something like occurs, like the Columbia disaster, how do you deal with fear? How do other astronauts deal with fear?
A Columbia accident was not fear-making. You had to have thought about the risk way, way before you saw an accident happen. You can't just blithely hope. As an astronaut, we dig into everything to the nth degree, as closely as we can. And we really dug into the problem that Columbia had faced real time, and we thought we understood the problem, but we were wrong.
And you were in Russia. That was the worst part.
I was in Russia. I actually was back in I was in Russia watching the flight happen, but I came back to the United States. I hadn't been in the States in 18 months. I came back to the States the day before Columbia came into the atmosphere. So I woke up my first day back in North America after having been NASA's director in Russia, and woke up to the disaster that was the Columbia reentry. But the key is, it's not that it was a fearful thing, it was an egregious mistake in judgment and technical know-how on our part, on my part, on everybody's part. That was the real crux of what to suffer as a result of Columbia, and then a decision-making process for what to do next.
What to do after. But you say on your part.
Oh,
what could you have done?
I was already an astronaut who'd flown twice in space. I was NASA's director of operations in Russia. I had a voice. I wasn't in charge of NASA, but I'm a respected and experienced astronaut, and I watched that little clip of video watching the foam come off the external tank and strike the wing and shatter. I watched it. Just, you know, on your computer you can roll forward and back. I rolled forward and back probably 15 times, watching it thinking, that isn't right. You know, that's worse than we've seen. But I listened to prevailing opinion. I kind of tried to go with my own judgment. I also looked at, well, we don't have an arm on that particular shuttle, so we can't go look. Okay, I think we're going to be okay. And, you know, the crew on board agreed. They listened to all the judgment, they looked at the video, and they said, we don't think we need to go out and actually have a look either. And all of us were dead wrong.
So the lesson, if your gut tells you, if the brain tells you, act on it.
And if you can verify something, if you did have the time, then why not go do that? What could be more important than going and checking to see if we had the damage that we feared? And it changed and made spaceflight safer as a result. We learned a lot. We did not fritter away those lives. We learned an awful lot about how to fly more safely in space, but at the ultimate cost.
When you think about the trailblazing astronauts today, the early astronauts, what they didn't know.
Even the first shuttle flight, what an incredibly brave thing to do with John Young and Bob Crippen. That vehicle had never flown ever, and they got 2 people in it and launched and left Earth. What a gutsy thing to do. And it did not behave they expected during ascent. It lofted way above their expected profile. It's just craziness that we could get away with that. It took a lot of guts.
And those days, the selection process too, they pull you out of test pilot school and suddenly you're instant astronaut, or how did it work?
No, it was a little quicker. And I mean, someone like Buzz Aldrin, sure, he was a test pilot, but he was also a PhD out of MIT. They weren't slouches. They were hiring extremely accomplished and hard-driving, tough-nosed test pilots, which is absolutely what we needed, because those were new times and not good flying machines, and required a lot of real-time judgment just to succeed at the fundamental mission that they were being asked to accomplish.
When you're up there, what do you miss on Earth? I know you have to say the wife and the children and spicy food, sex.
I try not to miss anything, and I mean deliberately. You and I are sitting here, I could be missing all kinds of things. I've had some really great times in my life, and I don't spend any time missing things. I try, and it's not that I'm just a straight existentialist, but I don't think there's any point in wishing that it was 1976 or 1994. What's the point? So on the space station, I loved the life, the richness of what was going on, the views out the window, the million things I had to do. It freed me up to do things that otherwise I wouldn't.
Oh, but you have the patience, you're in the moment.
Yeah.
Were you born with patience? Did it happen on the corn farm?
Well, I think it's a chicken and egg thing. Patience is gratification deferred, which can make the gratification more sweet, but it also can lead to a gratification that otherwise could have never happened. If I'd required instant gratification or had not developed patience, there's no way I would have ever flown in space or commanded a spaceship.
How about your crew, people who are with you? I mean, nobody wants to work with a jerk, especially on the ISS, the International Space Station, or with the Russians.
We had no jerks on our crew, for sure. Good people. It's a really complex filter that initially selects astronauts, but then not everybody in the astronaut corps goes and lives on the space station. That's even a tighter filter. Only a subset can qualify to fly the Soyuz and live on station. Let me just brag on one crew member as an example, Tom Marshburn. He's a master's degree in engineering physics. He's a medical doctor, emergency room, classical guitarist. He walked from Canada to Mexico on the Pacific Coast Trail by himself when he was 19 and wrote a book about it. He's climbed peaks all around the world. He speaks Russian, and if you talk to him, you would swear you're the most interesting person he's ever met. He's just a fascinating, competent man to be with. And the whole crew was like that.
A true underachiever.
But it's just a busy guy doing things that he thinks are important and not trying to inflict them on other people.
So tell me what happens. You have uber doers up there. You have highly achieved people.
Just high-functioning folks.
High-functioning, but highly competitive. I'm thinking.
Somewhat. Mostly competitive with themselves. Okay. Trying to accomplish things, trying to better themselves, trying to look for, I mean, I like doing Sudokus. Sudokus are really competitive, but not competitive with anybody else. Because to me, this is a really complex problem, and I can actually make my brain lift better weights by figuring out how to do this thing in my head. And I find great joy in solving a really complex problem, and I don't care if anybody else can solve this problem faster or slower than me. When I play Scrabble, I love Scrabble, but mostly it's a challenging itch myself. How much can I squeeze out of this particular set of 7 letters that somebody gave me? And the competitive nature is important to me, but the competition with myself is the real vital one.
Okay, so you'd be a good golfer because you wouldn't worry about anybody.
I'm a bad golfer. That takes talent.
Okay, but good Scrabble player. I can ask your daughter about that because I know you play online with her.
I do indeed.
Kids all over the world. And,
we have a son in China and a daughter in Ireland.
What kind of toll does your kind of life, training, traveling, take on a spouse?
It requires that your family successfully live without you. That's the demand. And not just without you, but even without you when you return, right? Because you're going to be in for a while, and then I spent about 2/3 of my time on the road as an astronaut for 20 years. So my wife and my kids had to build a structure of a functioning family with all of its changes and evolutions as everyone gets older and changes what they're doing, where I was coming in with my particular desire for influence and then leaving again, in and out as a figure within the family.
Sure.
So it works fine. You could set up a structure. You have to recognize that that's how the variables are going to be, though. I couldn't come barging into the family and say, hey, the paterfamilias is back, and now everybody do exactly what I say. It would be the worst -1 influence on the family any father could be.
But they're listening to Elton John, and you're listening to Stan Rogers, the Northwest Passage, right?
Which is as lovely a Canadian anthem as we could ever come up with. If you want to honor what our country is and what the North is in our history and psyche, Northwest Passage is a great song.
Yes, to the Beaufort Sea.
Yeah.
Franklin and the Gang.
I know the song.
I bet you do. Hard to tune a guitar in space?
I actually had a little app on my iPad to help me tune it, and then once it's in tune, because the humidity never changes and the temperature never changes, it stays in tune forever. It's one of the best places I've ever had. Star City, Russia, that's a tough place to tune a guitar because the humidity and temperature is so variable.
I'm sure. Yeah. And when you break, is it Mach 25?
We go about Mach 25, about 25 times the speed of sound, about 8 kilometers a second or so. It's fast. Yeah.
I flew the Concorde, the French Concorde. That's Mach 2.
Yeah, I know. The space shuttle goes through the Concorde, altitude and airspeed, accelerating straight up 70 seconds into flight. So yeah, we go fast.
Chris Hadfield, retired, but soon to be professor.
Thanks you very much. Nice to talk with you today.
Nice to talk with you.
Thanks, man.
And Chris Hadfield, An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth. A good read. Thank you, Commander Hadfield, for sharing the stars with us. And up next, Canadian journalist held captive in Somalia, where her dream was to reach a house in the sky. Amanda Lindout is next.